So this module is about the chaff cart. Chaff carts came to Australia a long time ago. We saw them adopted, then we saw them disadopted, and now they've had a renaissance. The chaff cart has become more popular, and we'll talk a little bit about why the chaff cart is now a popular harvest weed seed control tool. So when they first came to Australia, they had this air slinger design. There was a cross auger across the back of the harvester. There was a air slinger which shot the weed seeds into the chaff cart. Now this piece of equipment was a little temperamental, and also it collected pure chaff. And so when we burnt these dumps, they smouldered for days. Later on, we saw a grower, Lance Turner, use an elevator. He wasn't the first to use it, but he's done a lot of the development, and now we're seeing chaff carts with elevator delivery system. They've got some real benefits. There's less infrastructure on the back of the harvester, there's less to modify on the back of the harvester, and they put a little bit of straw in the dumps, and having that straw in the dumps mean those dumps burn out very quickly. So this is part of the renaissance of the chaff cart, is that the elevator delivery system is a much better chaff delivery system. So with the elevator delivery systems, we can buy a new chaff cart for around $75,000 to $80,000 with an elevator delivery system, or we can retrofit that system to an old chaff cart, and there's been a lot of this going on in Australia. Obviously with the chaff cart, we're talking about just the chaff, so we've got to get the weed seeds into the chaff fraction, and then we need to get that chaff fraction into the chaff cart. And using a baffle is one of the systems that growers are using to make sure the chaff ends up in the chaff cart and not going out with the straw. Some harvesters need a baffle more than others. Some harvesters are already very good at separating chaff and straw, others are not so good, and what these baffles do is, if we have the sieve, we have a baffle above that sieve, we are directing the chaff below the baffle and into the chaff cart rather than going above the baffle and into the straw. So baffles are hard to describe, but for some harvesters they're quite important to make sure, one, that we get that good chaff straw separation, we get the chaff in the chaff cart, but secondly, we don't get too many dumps. Some harvesters, before they have a baffle, create lots of dumps and remove lots of residue, but putting the baffle in can reduce that residue removal. One of the common questions is, does the chaff cart slow the harvest operation? Well, we have to harvest low, so that can slow the operation a little, but you don't have to stop to dump. They dump on the run. So growers, as they harvest with the chaff cart, just press a button and dump on the run, and it doesn't slow the harvest operation at all. The common practice for chaff carts is that the dumps are put in a line across the paddock. Then in autumn in Australia, which is in the February-March period, March-April perhaps, where growers put a fire break around the line of dumps and then burn the dumps to destroy the weed seeds. That's one system, but there's also another. This system involves grazing the chaff dumps with sheep. And what the sheep do is they do quite well on the chaff dumps. There's new research showing the sheep benefit from grazing chaff dumps because there's a collection of good feed there. But what they do is they graze the chaff dumps down, and some farmers are then just seeding through them without burning. So this is a really good system with the chaff cart for mixed farmers. This is a picture of a chaff dump that has been seeded through. So the chaff was dumped this year, grazed down to about 30 or 40 centimetres high, and the farmer just seeded through it. So as you can see, there's not a lot growing there. There's not a lot of crop just in that patch, which might be the size of a vehicle perhaps, but there's also not a lot of weeds, because weeds really don't like growing in chaff. So this can be a really good, simple system where the animals just graze the chaff dump down and the farmer can seed through without needing to do that burning in autumn. And this is what it can look like 2 years later. Once that chaff breaks down and composts, it can be a really productive part of the paddock because of all of that nutrition that is in the dump. And once again, you would think you would see a lot of weeds in a situation like this, but in many situations they're not super weedy. We get a range of results there. Some farmers say it is weedy, others find it not so weedy. But essentially it can be a very productive part of the paddock because of that composting effect. Another variation on this system is for growers to then go and burn what's left of those dumps in winter. So they've made the chaff dump, grazed it, seeded through it, and then when they get a 2-week dry period in winter and the chaff is dry enough, they just go and light it up with the crop around it. It's a great system because there's no need for fire breaks or fire management because the fire can't get away in a green crop, and it can be done very quickly in just a couple of days to do an entire farm. So this is just another variation on how the chaff cart can fit into a farming system. Once the chaff dumps have been burnt, whether it burnt in winter like this picture here or whether it was burnt in autumn, we do have some bare patches. Nothing much grows on those patches. There is something in the residue, we don't know what it is, but it stops plants from growing. Once there's been enough rainfall to leach that through the soil, this effect goes away. So it is a negative, but it only affects a very small percentage of the paddock. If we take a look at the cost of running a chaff cart, and this example here is buying a new chaff cart, so if we look at finance, extra fuel, the cost to burn the dumps, that can come to around about $8.90 per hectare, and then we need to add the residue removal cost to that, which is $2.25 per tonne of wheat harvested. So the chaff cart for, say, a 2-tonne crop can come in at around about $13 to $14 per hectare. So the pros and cons of chaff carts: the pros, that ability to graze the dumps, the sheep do well, and then there can be no need to burn prior to cropping. There's the ability to use over the entire crop, whereas something like windrow burning might only be used over part of the cropping program. There's minimal residue removal, we're talking about 15% residue removal perhaps. The elevated delivery system enables a faster burn time and is just a better machine in general. And you get to learn about harvest losses. One particular grower said to me once he put his chaff cart on, he realised how much canola he'd been throwing out the back of his harvester all of these years. He actually drove his harvester through the dumps again to harvest that canola. So growers are learning something about how much grain they're losing out of the back of their harvester and then setting the harvester right to minimise those grain losses. And it's a medium cost implement. The chaff cart is in the middle of the cost of the harvest weed seed control tools. But of course there are some cons. There's the fire risk and smoke if you're burning the chaff dumps. Towing the cart, this is not popular with some growers, particularly in hilly country. There's the capital cost. New chaff carts can cost in the order of $80,000, so that's something to consider. There's labour required in autumn to burn dumps, which can be a busy time of the season, and there is some nutrient removal cost. While it's at the lower end, there is a nutrient removal cost. So where does the chaff cart fit? Well, essentially it fits everywhere, but first and foremost for me, mixed farmers with sheep. There is research coming out showing that sheep do well, and so often what we do for the sheep is bad for the crop and vice versa, but this is an example where the chaff cart is good for the sheep and good for the crop. So mixed farmers with sheep is a good fit for the chaff cart. But we're not limited to that. The chaff cart can be applied everywhere. A lot of continuous cropping farmers are using chaff carts, so it really applies to all farming systems in Australia. It's cost effective in all rainfall zones, and it's effective at all different yield levels. So narrow windrow burning suits lower yielding crops. The chaff cart can be used in any yielding crop. So in summary, the chaff cart, it's an old tool, but it's had some development. It's had a renaissance. We're seeing new adoption of chaff carts in Australia, particularly for farmers, mixed farmers with sheep. It's really good fit there for that system, but it really does fit all cropping systems in Australia.